Welcome to the Jane's Walk Festival 2020 panel discussions.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion on crowdsourcing the community. It's so exciting to have all of you join us from all over the world and to be able to have a conversation with David and Valentina today. My name is Rachel Lissner, and I am very honored to be moderating this conversation. I have a Facebook group called the Young Urbanist League. It's about 6,000 people, and it's an online gathering space which is intended for people to connect in all sorts of ways to discuss community issues, whether it's urbanism or social or whatever it is, whatever people are thinking about in Toronto and how you can make cities for everyone. It's a place to be for that. And I am here today with David Gorski, and I want to make sure that I do his bio justice. So David is a software developer and urbanist focused on creating technology to improve community discussions, empower the individual citizen, and improve municipality efficiency. He believes a truly smart city isn't created by sensors or cameras, but by leveraging the intellect and creativity of its people. The manifestation of his goals is Planned Together, a map-based urban planning platform, which allows everyone to discuss and plan the futures of their communities. I am also here today with Valentina Harper. Valentina is a longtime community organizer and activist on matters such as Indigenous self-determination. Due in part to her advocacy work and online-based profession as an account manager for a rare book dealer called Paper Cavalier, she became a mouthpiece and co-founder of CareMongering TO, which has since become a global movement, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard about in the past few weeks. So we're gathered here today to discuss crowdsourcing communities. So in this era that we live in, what does it look like? What's the impact of COVID on crowdsourcing technology and engagement? And what is the role of online communities and all of that? And before we do anything else, I just want to make sure that we acknowledge the land that we're gathered on. I'm personally here in Toronto, along with, I think David's in Toronto, Valentina is as well, and Igor. So I'm going to read words that reflect that. But it's important to recognize that we can adapt this to where we find ourselves all over the world. So I'd like to share these words that Valentina shared with me, and they read, "We would like to acknowledge that we're currently on the traditional lands of various Indigenous nations that are governed by the Dish with One Spoon, which is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territories and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect." And I think that is something we should think about in all of our actions, in all that we do, and all the ways that we gather. And it's interesting to take those words and what that means to gather in this place, which is both, our neighborhoods, our cities, the land that we're on, but also online. So I have a lot of thoughts on online gatherings, but we were asked a bunch of questions, and I don't want to take up any more time, but we were given a bunch of questions to consider as part of this conversation. So I'm going to go through those questions with David and Valentina, and we have a clear starting point, but as it's a Jane's Walk, and if you've never been on a Jane's Walk before, you might learn that you don't necessarily know where you're going to wind up. It's a walk and talk kind of deal. So we're going to meander and see where we find ourselves. And around 5:40 or so, maybe a bit later, we are going to shift to a Q&A. So if you have questions, I'm hoping that I will find them in the Q&A section. So message me there, and I'll try to bring them into the conversation. And I think those are all of my Master of Ceremonies remarks. And yeah, thanks for coming. So on that note, I'm going to kick it off with all of these questions. I have a whole lot of technology going on right now. So, first actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to David and Valentina, and I'll let you explain the work that you do, because that's why we're here, to hear about what you're thinking about So I'll start with David first. If you just want to talk about your work with Plantio, and you can maybe demonstrate what that looks like.
Yeah, hello. I hope my audio quality is good enough. Yeah, so I started a plan together a few months ago uh, as a form of online forum that allows people to discuss specific points on the map. Because I realized there is a very weird discrepancy between the fact that urban planning plays such a huge role in our lives, but it doesn't have a lot of input from the average person. So the average person has very specific and they have kind of they really know what they want. For instance, in their home, they want a certain couch, a certain position, they want some kind of artwork on the wall. But as soon as they leave their house, they no longer feel they have a claim to say, this is the way the road should be laid out. This is what we should have here. We should have a park here, right? And so I really wanted to give a voice to people so that they could really, you know, be able to put their opinions out there. And not only that, but connect with others. They have similar opinions. So I'm just going to share my screen for a second, just for those who haven't seen Plan Together before, right? So Plan Together is just a simple, website like this. And so on the map here, because I'm actually in Waterloo right now, but if we go to the Toronto section, so we get to see what others have submitted. We get to see also the recent things here. And so, we can see a recent addition, Rest Stop Under the Gardener by Stephen, for example. Here, we can see what he said. We can see his justification. He attached a picture, and we know exactly where it is. And there can be comments. He posted this morning, so there isn't yet any. But I find that this form of discussion is something that can really enable communities to understand what is important, what to prioritize, and really just get a feel of what is really happening out there. Because our communities are growing. Well, our cities are millions of citizens now, and so it's really hard to keep track of all that. So having the ability to put suggestions, news stories, praises or criticisms, I think is really good. And I think I want to highlight the fact that there's a praise marker, because I don't want there to be just like a very big atmosphere of negativity and tearing down everything, because it's important to acknowledge what works and what we do like, to really kind of give a sense of respect and direction to those things, to the initiatives that have already been tried. So yeah, Plan Together is currently, it's growing slowly, and the community is getting more and more engaged. So I really hope that this will be a great chance for many community groups to have their information in a single, community-oriented platform. So that's pretty much the summary of what Plan Together does.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Valentina, I'm going to turn it over to you just to explain CareMongering TO and just
certainly
how it came to be.
Sure. My name is Valentina Harper, and I'm originally from Chile. I arrived in Canada in the mid 80s, and I now live on Turtle Island, which you also know as Canada. So what we do is with CareMongering Toronto specifically, I do a lot of other community work, but this particular group that we started on Facebook that's grown to over 27,000 people. And as Rachel mentioned, is now a global movement. We have over 300 satellite locations globally, over 750,000 people who have joined CareMongering local groups throughout the world. And so what started as a Toronto initiative by a group of Indigenous, Brown, and Black people as a group to bring mutual aid during a time of great need has really grown to expand into something we didn't expect. And so we are now negotiating what that can look like and what that can evolve into. The main purpose, of course, of CareMongering is mutual aid, which is a form of assistance that marginalized communities have been lending to each other since time immemorial. It's how we've survived all of the strife that we've gone through, and we continue to go through. So mutual aid is very much a political process. CareMongering in Toronto is very much in that process of advocating for marginalized communities within the city of Toronto, and now of course at a global level. And we're here to help each other. Mostly through, and mutual aid has always been a way to help each other through, and because of the failures of 3 levels of government, particularly in Canada, and it's why things are not in place and systems are not in place that should be, and this is why people are suffering more than they need to. So CareMongering in Toronto really was about coming together as a community and assisting each other to make sure that people have what they need during this very difficult time. So it was a way for us to provide a platform to connect.
Wow, that's phenomenal. There's so much in what you just said that I could just unpack with you for hours if you would let me. But something that I've been thinking about a lot lately is within my own online community, which is the Young Urbanist League. That space, it's a general space. It's evolved over time. Like it started with just like me and a few friends, and now it's 6,000 people. And the culture of it's changed significantly. And my idea when I started it was that, like Jane Jacobs said, is that you don't need to be a professional to know what you know. And different type, like credentials are one way of identifying and valuing knowledge, but there's so many other ways that you can be an expert, which is the whole point of Jane's Walk. And as the community grows and as, the internet gets bigger, smaller, I think a lot about who's using what tools and who's in which spaces and what culture is being created and established and is guiding conversations and what's visible to whom and how and why. So everything that you just said is, as I said, there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm really excited that CareMongering exists, and also has planned together that type of thing, encouraging positivity and community building, as opposed to saying from the get-go things are bad and we're going to get together because things are bad. Identifying the positive to bring each other up and to build together, I think, is essential in online organizing and crowdsourcing. So I'm excited that you both share those values as online organizers. So I'm going to move along to the questions because time is flying. And I'm going to start with a question that I thought was really interesting when I first heard it, which is that do you feel that there's been an increased dependency on online connections and crowdsourcing? And in what ways do you think, like in the world that we live in right now, do you feel like your world or people's worlds are shrinking or expanding? And I loved this question because I had a million responses to it. But I'd love to hear about your personal experiences and those of the people that are engaging in the spaces you've created.
David?
Okay, yeah. So we were asked, do we feel an increased dependency on online connections, crowdsourcing has broadened the sense of community or shrunk it, right? And I would say that the sense of community in general has shrunk a lot, not because of technology necessarily, but because there's been an ever-growing group identity size since really the Stone Age, right? So before, we would live in very small communities. If there was something wrong in the immediate environment, or we wanted to reach out, we would have a maximum of 100 people where we could really bring up the problems and bring up, what's either affecting you or what's going to affect the whole community. And right now, if you say you're a citizen of Toronto, for example, you're putting yourself in the same group as millions of people that you don't know, you don't see their face. Thing to get lost and to say, I'm a citizen of Toronto, really you're just a drop in the bucket in that sense. And so that's why I hope that, because technology is what enabled these huge cities in the first place, I really hope that we can leverage technology to at least a little bit offer a chance to fix these feelings of irrelevance and voicelessness by really empowering the ability to share and collaborate with this unprecedented amount of people that are in one group.
Valentina, what do you think? Do you have
Yeah,
any?
I want to echo what David said. He's absolutely correct. It has shrunk our circles in a sense that we have become very, there's something called community pods that have become really popular during COVID-19. And those are so um, micro, like it's a very, very small area that they cover. And it really is about community extending out their arms and being able to reach out to the person that's closest to them. And when it comes to technology and how we're using it in order to connect, we definitely have been able to create these pockets of smaller communities within our larger communities that have been able to assist each other because of their close proximity to each other. So we're talking specifically about the space that they occupy, whether it be a very small neighborhood, a small pocket in the annex, a small pocket in Don East, that kind of thing. But the interesting thing that we've seen, David, is we've also, the opposite side of the coin is that we've expanded into communicating with and uh, linking up with communities in Malaysia, East Africa, um, Thailand, Philippines. We never had these types of community organizing links before. And what CareMongering has managed to do without ever meaning to, because it really was meant to be a couple of dozen people when we first started the group, we never dreamt that it was going to grow to this, is that it has, on the opposite side of the coin, also allowed us to really widen our reach and to grow
Mhm.
a much larger international global community at a much larger level, which of course, but within itself, David is right, within itself. So we have these umbrella organizations under CareMongering, but then they are all very small and very localized. So, but it is
Mhm.
interesting how that has happened, that we have been able to create. Oh, Mexico City reached out to us this weekend, and they're going to be opening an umbrella location in Mexico City. So, in some way, yes, absolutely, it's shrunk it and it's become more focused. And on the other side, it's also allowed us to reach out incredibly to communities that we've never had contact with. So.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's a perfect example of what I meant with the fact that technology will be the thing that helps us recapture a sense of greater community,
Absolutely.
right? Because it's what originally caused the problem, and what I think will at least be a partial solution. So
Yes,
I really think that's a good example of that.
for sure.
Hmm. Um, so with all of those connections that are being made all over the world, like Valentina, you mentioned places, very far from where we are right now. What, how does that translate to communities that maybe don't have the same level of technology that we have? Sometimes that's, a matter of like just there's a lack of internet infrastructure in
Yeah.
places in East Africa. Or here in Toronto, it's a matter of inequity where we just,
Hmm.
we don't say that internet is a right, but when so much is being communicated online and it's hard to, go out and poster it because we're trying to be respectfully distant from each other.
Right.
How does that impact caremongering or
Well,
community organizing?
that's where community pods come in. That's where the whole pod and pod mapping comes in. So I actually knew nothing about community pods before this all started. I'm learning. I was thrown into the deep end, and so what it is that you're really, there's, for example, a lot of elderly people who, that is a huge gap. For example, in Toronto specifically, let's be very focused on just this area because we could talk about for days on end about the lack of accessibility to technology in the world. But if we're going to talk about Toronto, which is a connected city, right, where everybody theoretically has access to the internet, which we know that's not the case. Let's look at a specific demographic of elderly people, or people who are living on fixed incomes, people on OW, ODSP, who don't have access to an internet connection or perhaps a laptop or a smartphone. There's just a lack of accessibility or a lack of knowledge about how to use the technology. So there's two different demographics that don't have access. And the pods allow for the people who do have the connectivity and the technology savvy, right? They're aware of how to use these tools. And we're using Slack to organize, we're using Facebook and other tools to organize. The idea is that when the community pod comes alive, you have people physically dropping off
Mhm.
a community pod paper with an email, if you don't have email, with a phone number that you can call if you need assistance. So this is a very physical thing. You have somebody who's literally dropping off in every single mailbox or under the door a little paper that says, hey, this is your community pod. I'm the organizer. Feel free to give me a call if you need groceries, if you need someone to pick up your prescriptions for you. And so that is how it's so basic. Like, it's so simple to say, I'm going to just write up a bunch of pieces of paper or print them, you know, because I have the access, right? So I'm going to use my privilege, my access to assist people who perhaps don't, or who don't know about us, or who may have some access to us, but they don't know how to reach us. And that's where the pods come in. I thought that was the most creative thing ever, because I had the same question. I'm like, how do we reach these people? And it was so simple. We print these little flyers and we drop them in their mailbox or under their doors, and it was just so simple. It blew me away. And it's nothing, you know, nothing to do with technology there, but we are leveraging technology in order to reach these people. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. My roommate actually started a neighborhood pod, and it went from being like, oh, like I heard about this thing, to asking the city councilor to print out slips of paper for us. And then he just went around and flyered our one block, and it has blossomed into this thriving community that did not exist a few weeks ago. And I personally find that I talk to my neighbors the most out of anybody these days, like people who I literally did not know. They are now truly my whole world. So when I think about whether my world is shrunk or expanded, I feel both, because like I mostly just stay on my block, but I know so many people now, and like literally borrowing sugar. And we have a Facebook group that we started, which is one way that we communicate, but we are mindful that not everyone's on Facebook. But I'm just living all of these truths that you're sharing with us.
Yeah.
David, I don't know if you wanted to respond to that, or if you wanted, maybe we could shift the conversation in a slightly different direction.
Maybe I could just contribute one thought.
Sure.
Just because I do believe that traditional public engagement forums do not provide for certain demographics an ability to raise their voice, and I think a big part of that, right? Because Valentina touched on economic circumstances where people able to, you know, they don't have the means to afford a device to access the internet. But there's also an aspect, a time-based aspect, if there is no online engagement. Whereas, you know, if there's a working class father or mother that has to work long hours and they have political connections, sorry, they don't have political connection. Sorry, I just got a call. I had to hang up. They may not have time to go to an important public meeting where something's going to affect them, right?
Yeah.
And so for those people, even though they may have internet, but if the public meeting is where the decisions are being made, and you know they have a student teacher interview right after work, they can't go to the public meeting, right? I think that silences a lot of voices, because there's a really high barrier to entry to, you know, to actually get down to the public meeting, spend an hour and a half, right, sitting. And I think having an online outlet is something that will really allow a broader demographic to share their voice.
That's super valid, David. I hadn't even thought about that, and I'm a parent, a working parent. So that's brilliant. Actually, it's a really, really valid point.
So one thing that I've been kind of thinking about or mulling over is how all three digital spaces that we care for are outside the institutional realm. And I just think it's really interesting that, like, when I look at CareMongering TO, that it's thousands of people who are stepping in for the role of government services, or, you know, a lack of communication. And plan together is the same thing. Like, there's 311 where you can, if you see something, you can, you know, identify it for the municipality to attend to. But I know in the space that I run, the Young Urbanist League, I often post consultations, like, you should go to this thing, or like, the city is requesting for you to participate. And I just feel like the government's maybe not doing the best job of communicating that, and it's my volunteer role to do this.
Yeah.
And given the way that the world has changed, and that, you know, we're really in Canada seeing a very top-down approach, I'm curious to see if the government's going to start creating spaces that mirror our own projects, and what thoughts you have on that. Or like Naomi Klein was talking about the role of Facebook and other platforms in the world of coronavirus capitalism, and that we rely on all of these private, different platforms that are private. And I don't know if we're always on the same page as our own organizing efforts, and just what will that look like in the future? And like what concerns do you have when it comes to organizing online in a time of a global health crisis? And do you have any fears, or like what kind of things are people sharing with you in terms of like concerns, negative feelings, question marks, anything like that? Anything come to mind?
Well, I have a lot to say about that, but I want to know if David wants to go first.
I had the rare experience of launching Plan Together actually just as COVID was starting.
Oh, wow.
Right. So I don't know a pre-COVID world when it comes to having this organization. But you touched on something in your question about how will the future of official engagement look like, right? And I think that's something that I planned from the start with Plan Together. I really hope to get municipalities involved in an official way, right? And there's a set of municipal tools that, you know, if a city chooses to join, they can directly comment and communicate back to the community that's active there, right? And so actually since this since I launched and since the pandemic, there's been a few urban planners in official roles that have reached out to me, right, to kind of get that started, because their traditional avenues of in-person consultation has unfortunately been, you know,
Have disappeared.
it's not possible at this moment, right? So I really hope, yeah, I really do hope that this leads to something that's more direct, right? And so that the citizens can talk amongst themselves, that's really great, but to also get that official connection.
I was going to touch on what you mentioned, Rachel, about, you know, the fact that we're using these tools that are owned by corporations, right? That are not like for the commons. I mean, we're all using them where they're free to us, unless of course you're paying for the fancy Zoom meeting. But I really think, just coming from the tech world, because I've worked in this field for a long time. There is so much potential right now for us to be creating our own tools. We have all of these young people who have an enormous amount of knowledge about how to build things, how to, you know, they're young developers. I'm not talking about I'm talking about like product development, you know, internet service. I mean, I'm sorry, apps and other types of platforms, right? And so I think right now we have a wealth of information that we can use. And I think we need to move away from the massive platforms like Facebook and create a more community-oriented, non-corporate entity that does the same thing. And I know that's a huge threat to the corporations who make billions of dollars off of advertising to people like us who are on Facebook every day, particularly right now because we use, from a community organizing perspective, from an activist perspective, we use Facebook to communicate and to organize events. And I really think we need to stop this dependency on these large corporations. We have the access to the technology, the knowledge, and these young, hungry kids who, I don't mean hungry, I mean like they're ready to go, and they want to share their knowledge. They're more progressive. They're not in the middle of you know, they tend to be more progressive thinkers. They're critical thinkers. They're vibrant ideas. Without them, we don't have a future. And so I want to look to that generation. I mean, my family's that generation. I have a 22 and a 16-year-old, both boys who are incredibly gifted when it comes to technology. Those are the brains I need to tap. That's where I want to go. I want to move away from these massive corporations that are kind of they're setting a bit of that tone, right? Because there's a level of censorship as well when it comes to organizing politically on these platforms. So I think that right now it would be ridiculous for us not to take this opportunity to develop our own tools. And when I mean tools, I mean apps, and to develop our own sites and go from there and make something that's more communally run than thinking from the top down, right? So I think we have the potential. The knowledge is there. There's so many young college students who are being picked up by the large companies, and being, working for these massive corporations and game developers. And I mean, maybe we could put them to work in things that are, or maybe, we can help them gear that knowledge that they have into something that's going to help our community develop in a more equitable way, because these companies aren't doing an awful lot of ethical or community building. So let's be honest about that. And if we can tap into those brains and build something beautiful, there's no reason we shouldn't be doing that now. We have the tools to do it.
Yeah. I loved both of those answers so much. And again, I feel like I could talk about this with you for a very long time. But I'm going to flag that we have 20 minutes left, so this just
Oh
flew
no.
by. And I have one question that I'm really curious about, and then we have a few questions from the community. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask my question, and I'm going to combine two of these questions and then propose the last one. So my last question for now is, um, how do you handle burnout and fatigue? Because what I find when it comes to community consultations, again, like we're all, as online organizers, the three of us are all, we intersect in so many ways, but we're also targeting different things. I mean, I like a general conversation group. CareMongering is mutual aid, and then Plan Together is very much more urban planning and city building and design.
Right.
But I feel like you still have to go up against the real world of bureaucracy and making connections and reinventing the wheel very frequently, even though you shouldn't do it all the time. So I'm curious to know what you think of burnout fatigue, digital fatigue, like being on Zoom calls all day.
All the time.
And I find one thing that I get really frustrated with is that in consultations with the city or whatever's going on, that people don't seem to be recognized as a finite resource. And the consultation tends to happen like way after it needs to happen, or it's done and then it's not really implemented in a respectful way. So thinking about examples like that, like why ask people to participate when you don't really want them to, and it's more of like a box to check off. Um, in these times where people are they're carrying the capacities are just stressed more so than usual. How does that look in your world, and what do you think can be done to address that? Or I don't know, what do you think of that question? Valentina, do you want to start? You look like you have thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, no, always. My brain's always going. So the first part is when it comes to fatigue and how do you handle this, you're burned out, right? Because we are burned out. We're I'm still working full time. I'm actually ironically doing really well right now with my accounts because we sell books and people are home reading. And so I happen to be extremely busy at work. So there's that. But then the community organizing is always going to be a bit more exhausting because particularly with CareMongering, where we now have this very varied demographic in CareMongering. It's not just marginalized communities who are in CareMongering now. It's middle class people, upper middle class people. We're really surprised about the number of the differences in when it comes to demographics when we're all coming together and having these discussions. So one of the things that I have encountered with this process is that fatigue doesn't look the same for everyone. Okay, so people who are marginalized, who are house insecure, who are food insecure, who are racialized, who are oppressed on some level or another, are way more exhausted just from the process of existing than people who are coming from a more privileged perspective. So I want to make that clear first, because we're not all on the same boat. Okay, and I know that that's been echoed a lot because it's a really positive sentiment, but we really need to step away from that exceptionality and say we're not all on the same boat. And I read the best thing yesterday and said some people are on a yacht, some people are on a rowboat, some people are on a blow up floating device, and some people are swimming for their lives. So it's really important to understand that the majority of the community organizing that's happening right now, it's happening within the communities that are already struggling, because that's what we do. Part of the process of survival for marginalized communities, whether you're Indigenous, Black, Brown, immigrants, people who are, you know, struggling for a place at the table, right? Existing is exhausting enough. So now add this, all of this stress, right, of having to have a higher cost for purchasing food. Everything's more expensive now. I mean, I've felt it. Not being able to, perhaps I don't drive, for example, if I need to go somewhere urgently or take my family to see a doctor, I don't have that accessibility. So I don't want people to think that everybody's at the same level of stress or exhaustion, because that is absolutely untrue. You have people who have the ability to connect more easily, to work from home. I've always worked from home. I have a level of privilege that other folks don't. I've always worked from home, right? So I'm very lucky. But there are people who don't have that privilege. And so it's really important for us to really make it clear, and I want to take that opportunity to do so, that the burnout isn't the same for everyone. And so we need people who are on a level of privilege that's above those of marginalized communities to pick up some of that slack, to do some of that work, because marginalized communities are already exhausted enough just from their day-to-day lives, right? So that's the first thing. Now, we're really good at organizing, because without organizing and mutual aid, we don't exist on this plane. We wouldn't be here. The fact that we take care of each other as marginalized communities is what is the reason we're still all represented on some level, on, you know, with our demographics. So I can't say that it's the same level of stress for everybody. And but we do have these tools right now that are making things a little bit easier, in the sense that we can reach out to wider swaths of people with this information, and in the attempts of trying to inform them that we're not all in the same boat. We all are suffering from the same stress, which is COVID-19, but we are handling it differently based on the amount of difficulties that our lives are paired with. So I think that we have an amazing opportunity to have people who have not struggled as much to step up and step up to the plate and assist us, those of us who come from marginalized communities, in effecting the meaningful changes that need to happen, that are glaringly obviously needed right now, when for example, you know, not enough people having access to the basics, and then fighting for that together. We are all in this together, but some of us have more than others, and that's never going to be okay, at least not in my books. So I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that we all have different levels of bandwidth. And some of us are really at the end of ours, because you do enough community organizing, you get to a point where you realize that there's quite a bit of pushback from the city, and you know, and what we need is a meaningful legislative change that is representative of the situation that we're all seeing now, and the needs that we're seeing at this particular time.
Wow, that was a very there's like, again, like so much to say about that. That was a wonderful answer, and I think that a lot of people in this chat might be familiar with a lot of the issues that you raised, but it's always important to flag that time and time again, that people have different bandwidths, and that they are dealing with this in different ways, and it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Right.
And you know, it's nice to see in Toronto posters that say we're all in this together with the honest Ed's writing, but in reality that's not the case, and it misses the mark and excludes a lot of people. This is why I'm thinking about these things. Like, what does it look like when you bring all these people together, and then everyone is dealing with it in their own way, and then
it's painful.
And like the parameters of, you know, having to mash it out online because you can't negotiate this face to face, and
it's painful, it's hard, and often it's not safe for marginalized communities to be in these groups where people don't understand what it means to be marginalized. So we struggle with that with a group of 27,000 people. How do we manage the conversation so that people who don't understand what it is to be poor, systematically or generationally, how do we manage those conversations so that compassion becomes the immediate response before judgment? And I think we all as human beings need to work on that. Every single one of us needs to do better at that.
Yeah, 100%. David, I'm going to yield space to you if you want to add to Valentina's comments, or if you want to take my very loose question about burnout and capacity in another way, or if you want me to perhaps ask another question, or Valentina, if you want to pop back in.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, maybe I could approach it from another angle as someone who would be more privileged and doesn't have really fears of you know not being able to put food on the table. But there is also a sense of, if you have an organization and you're trying to accomplish some goals, Valentina did touch on the fact that the city can be very slow moving. Having some kind of message to go out there can be very difficult. And I that when you put your heart and soul into something and you're not getting results, it can feel heavy, just on the soul there. And so I do think for organizers of community groups, I think it's important to understand that even a little bit of progress is progress.
Yeah.
Not put some lofty goals, just take it a day at a time. And if you can help someone accomplish their goals that one day, that should be enough. Not that you all of a sudden you expected that this will change the world, and it's been a few months and nothing's happened, right?
We know all about that. Yeah, we know all about that. I completely agree.
I promised participants that I would take questions from the Q&A. So I see that David's responded to them, but I am going to just bring them into the conversation now. And I'm also going to say that there's so much that I really want to talk about with the two of you. So if it's okay with you to go past a little bit, like if you
I have no problem. I don't know about the participants, but I don't mind at all if we needed to go a little bit. I can't speak for David, of course.
David,
No, I'm fine to keep going. Yes.
Yeah? All right. So people were asking. So this is a question from I'm gonna guess Levi, and someone named Sandy, and they were asking about more what like official bodies are doing. So Levi's asked, do you know of any municipalities that have taken community consultations online? And Sandy asked, do you have any statistics on the effectiveness of online consultations and how best to get municipalities to understand the importance of online consultation? Those, as I said, you are navigating different spaces online, but if you have any thoughts on those, like, please share them.
Sure. I see that David answered as well on the Q&A. So for Levi, so right now we have been approached by several MPs as well as the City of Toronto as an organization to come to the table and discuss some of the needs of our more marginalized communities. So that is happening. I think that what's happening is that there was such a momentum with the movement that we started that I think it caught their attention, and they realized that these discussions were happening, and the city should be concerned about what people think, because at the end of the day we are their voter base. So they have reached out. So we're hoping that some of those conversations do happen, and that we are invited to the table as an equal partner to discuss what needs to happen moving forward. I mean, status quo is obviously not working, so let's hope that means that meaningful consultation happens, and that within that meaningful consultation that effective legislative change actually takes place. And then the other question from Sandy regarding any statistics, not that I know of, Sandy. Personally, I don't think there's any large level studies that have allowed us to gather that kind of information. I mean, I don't work in stats, but I work with people who do work with stats, and I don't think I could, maybe David can correct me if I'm wrong, or Rachel, I don't think that anything has been significantly measured in order to see whether this type of consultation process is effective, whether it's whether it's engaging even. We seem to be seeing a lot of engagement ourselves. I had another call on Monday where a couple of hundred people showed up, and that was on city building, so city planning, sorry. So there is definitely engagement. People are interested in the process of engagement, and as David said, some people don't have the ability to show up to a in-person meeting. So I think we could definitely leverage this momentum and see if there can be something that can be meaningfully done. But not just that, we need to start measuring the effectiveness of us coming together in this format. So Sandy, really good question there. So there's nothing yet that I know of, but we definitely should be looking at it moving forward.
Did you want to add anything?
No, that's it. I put my voice on the text.
Are there any questions that you want to ask each other, or that you want to maybe open up to the participants that are here?
I would love to ask David if we can connect just from just the tool that you have right now. I love it. I'm a bit of a tech geek, so I do love what you're doing. The second you showed it to us, I was like, oh, there's so much I want to do with that. And I think there could be some real meaningful connection made, particularly with people who are sleeping rough. Who are using these spaces in a different way, who maybe don't have necessarily access to the internet. I think that creating some sort of advocacy around what they think could be improved in the city for them when it comes to housing, when it comes to accessibility, also talking to people, you know, who are dealing with, who are differently abled. There's just so much that we could do with that tool, David. I'm really excited to dig into it and to take a look. And I want you to consider the possibility of maybe connecting with some of those marginalized or differently abled communities, because they really have a lot to say about how the city doesn't work for them. And they also probably have really great vibrant ideas about what that could look like. And then also engaging with indigenous communities, urban indigenous communities, because there's so much they know about planting, about gardening, about, you know, gardening sustainably. And there's so many spaces in the city that could be used to feed people. And so I wanted to put that to David, and a bit of a challenge to connect with some of our indigenous folks here and see what he can do to assist with some of those ideas.
Yeah, if more people would get on plan together and it would actually enable change, especially for marginalized groups, that would be a dream come true for me. So I really hope I can get to do that.
Maybe we should connect.
I feel like you have a few emails to send in your future, David.
Igor has a really good question here, actually, that really caught me. He said, is there a fear that including governments might dilute your projects? How do you balance grassroots organizing with government intervention? Key question, Igor. Thank you for that. So that's tough, because especially when we are a grassroots organization, we're not an NGO. So we are definitely very weary and very careful and very conscious of how we engage with any political, be it a party or a government currently in place. We are also hyper aware of the fact that we can't affect any meaningful change unless we have a seat at the table. So we need to talk about what that seat at the table looks like. When we need to talk about how when city planners and city, developers, city planners are going into the communities that they're trying to affect change. For example, let's take a look at Regent Park, which is, they try to, I don't want to say gentrify the community, but bring in like a mixed income community. There isn't, we believe, any real meaningful discussion. There's a top-down approach where the government looks at what needs to get done, right? They look at the groups of people that they need to assist, or whether it's people, who need affordable housing, or people who, creating jobs, creating businesses within those hubs that allow people to be employed, that kind of thing. There isn't a real place for us in our communities to sit at the table with the city. So the first thing that needs to happen, Igor, is we need a equitable place at the table where we can be brought in, and our knowledge will be our ancestral knowledge, be it our traditional ancestral knowledge. Poor people know how to survive. If there's anything that poor people know how to do, is how to make things work, because often that is how that's sometimes the only way we survive. And so we need to be very careful how we engage with government entities to ensure that we keep control of our organization, so that our mission and our vision stays clear and it does not get derailed by government organizations or by corporations, which is what's been happening with CareMongering. We've had several corporations reach out to us saying, hey, we want to give you money. And we said, we don't want your money because you're investing in the theft of land in Wet'suwet'en. So thank you, but no thank you. So we will not lend ourselves to legitimize either government or companies to allow themselves to pat themselves in the back and say, hey, we did something good here. We're not so terrible. So it's really important. It's a great question, Igor. I think we have to be on the lookout and consistently aware of who we're engaging with, how we're engaging with them, and to make sure that our mission and our vision are not diluted and are not taken over by more official entities, because that's what grassroots it's all about, right? It's about community working together at a less official level, but at the same time, our voices are just as important as anyone else, if not more, because we're the people that are being affected by the decisions being made by government every day in this city, this province, and this country.
That was a phenomenal answer. I feel like I just need to let that kind of like soak in. And yeah. As I'm gonna say that I just like want to talk about this all day with you.
We're gonna hook up later.
Okay. Igor is also, he's on fire over here. He's asked another really great question. So I'm just going to throw that to the two of you, which is, how do we create community outside of pandemics or large-scale events? Is it a question of momentum? How do you create that momentum when there isn't a large-scale event like a pandemic happening? And this is something that my little neighborhood pod has tried to navigate, because while we're trying to figure things out day by day here, I say very clearly that my intention with all of the organizing that I'm doing in this moment is to build infrastructure for the future.
Right.
So while we need this now, we need it even more so in the future, because who knows what that's going to look like. And we need to think about the longevity and the legacy of the work that we're doing. And just, there's a lot of thought, like, to look to the people who will be the generations ahead. So that said, do you have any thoughts on that? Like, how do you create community outside of monumental moments like this?
I don't know, David, did you want to go?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think in terms of community organization and having the government involved in some sort of, that people actually are actively doing something, it's a matter of forming habits, both from the side of legislators and from the side of community. Because if you don't have the habit of thinking how we can make something better, you just see the problem and then you just continue on your day. But if you have if you form the habit of thinking, oh, how can I make this better? How can, I see someone that needs help. How do I, checking on these, community engagement kind of events. Yeah, so there really, I think, just needs to be habits from all sides to continue to do this day in and day out, and not just, we did this and then it kind of just fades away, right? Right? It's like, once you start a habit, you just keep going.
Yeah, I think I come from the world of large-scale events. I grew up with earthquakes and tsunami. Long story. I came here, like I'm all about the big events that are trying to kill you. So it is a really interesting question when it comes to building momentum, because my life has been filled with these large events where life and death are involved. I do tend to think and feel from a place where things need to get done. Like, we need to get things done. So momentum, it's unfortunate that people tend not to engage when there is a momentum, because most people are going through their daily motions. And so David hit on something really key. It's about building habits. So for me, it's a habit to think big picture. What can I do? How can we help? How can we change this? Because that's been my lived experience. But there's two groups of people when it comes to engagement, okay? Two groups of people that won't engage from two very different demographics. There's the first group of people that don't engage because they've never had any interest or inkling or education about politics and how that affects their daily lives. So they just go about apolitical, and that's okay, and that works for them. By the way, I'm not criticizing these groups. I'm just saying these are the people that we encounter. And so people like this are normally not engaged because they don't need to be. The status quo works for them. They're getting through life fine. Maybe they own a house, maybe they rent, but they're doing okay. They own a car, they pay for their insurance, their kids are in hockey, whatever. Life's working okay. You know, they're doing all right. They don't feel the need to engage because to them, life is in this, it's in this certain bubble. There is a certain bubble that occurs when you're not struggling as much, right? And so you don't feel the need to engage. And then there is the people who are so tired of engaging, or they're so exhausted, right? And then there are also people who don't have access to education in this very city, in this province, in this country. People who don't have access to higher education, people who don't have who don't come perhaps from families who are university educated. They're less likely to engage politically because they don't have the means or the access to do so. And then you have the people who are stuck right in the middle, who come from families who have struggled, who are striving to do better, who see the issues that are systemic and they need to change, and they understand how those issues affect them directly, how it's affected their families, and so they tend to engage. They tend to be more into the process of engaging. Those people have, as David said, they've created the habit of being engaged because that's just the way they think now. I need to be a part of the solution. And some people think, what solution? What's the problem? So we need to look at what that looks like. And I don't have the answer as to how we build momentum without a large scale event, because I don't know how else to function. There is this situation that we've all been thrown into, the whole entire world has been thrown into this COVID situation. And that has forced people to look at what's happening around them. They haven't had a choice. So I can't answer your question as to how we build something without the momentum of a large scale event, but what I can tell you is that we would be fools if we didn't leverage the momentum we have now to effect meaningful change in the future. We have a unique opportunity to not mess this up, to move forward in a way that is good for climate, that is good for people, that is good for the world in general, that doesn't evolve around profits before people. If we don't take this opportunity, and if we don't grab the bull by the horns, we have it right now by the horns. If we don't do something with it, we're just going to go back to status quo. People are going to continue to suffer, and that to me is unacceptable. So if we can't grow from this, if we can't take this momentum and leverage it and be really honest about what needs to happen, be really honest about our own personal privileges, be really honest about what needs to happen in your communities and the people that are suffering within your very own communities, and come to the table from a place of love, compassion, and community building as a whole, then I really believe we're doomed. I really believe that. We're being given this reset. Nature has hit a reset button on us, and we're being given this unique opportunity not to mess it up again. So if we do, well, it's too bad for us. But I really think that we really should. I mean, really, what's the excuse now, right? So it's like I said, I can't answer your question about how to build the momentum, but right now we're literally snowballing. We're a very large ball right now with hundreds of thousands of people attached to what's happened right now. Millions of people are seeing what's happening. We need to organize. We need to make it happen. It's all of our responsibilities to change inequity in the world.
So I, yeah, love that. I was pondering today what this period in history will be called in the short term and in the long term. And, are we going to call this the Great Reset, the Great Revisioning? Like, what kind of perspective are we going to have after the fact? And will it be a thing that has a positive outcome? Or is it a thing where we just kind of dreamt our way through it and then woke up right where we left off? But I don't want to use the word gift because that obviously doesn't match what's actually happening out in the world, but this is a very rare opportunity that we've been handed, and it needs to be handled in the best possible way for everyone. And yeah, organizing together is the best way we could do it. So I just want to be mindful of the time. I very easily can make this like a 5-hour talk, but I'm not. So like one quick question that I want to ask, but I don't know if we have time to like really unpack it, is the question of um, anonymity and community spaces online, and
Mm,
how that blends, like what does that yield in terms of engaging with each other? Because in the two spaces that you run, David, like in your space, people can share, they can have whatever name they want, but usually it's just a first name or a moniker. Whereas on Facebook, people again can have a moniker, but they're more likely to use their own name, and they have their own personal history. Like they're going to be seen in a variety of spaces.
yeah.
Uh, so I was curious about how that kind of colors um, engagement and outcomes and collaboration and things like that. So if you want to maybe quickly speak to that, and then I'm going to end with one more question, and then I will wrap this up.
I'll leave this one to David because I'm really curious myself as to how he's handling that.
There are advantages and disadvantages of allowing anonymity. An advantage would be that people are more likely to share exactly what they think, right? Disadvantage is that, you know, people aren't as, let's say, polite about certain things because there's no ramifications to their, you know, identity and their role in the community. I'm not particularly married to have anonymity for the rest of Plan Together's existence, and definitely if there would be more official engagement and more community groups requesting, there'd be more, you know, personal identities at the forefront. That would be something I would add, but it's definitely something that a decision that I won't take lightly, and definitely I think I'll have to consider both the pros and cons of that, because some people also don't feel comfortable putting their full name and picture online, right?
Mm. And geography.
And yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it's very unique because we actually have people asking for assistance. And so a lot of what that looks like is people saying, hey, I'm housebound. I can't leave my house and I need a drop off of this or that. And so those interactions have to be handled really carefully because it really comes down to safety. That's our biggest issue. So our platform specifically gears around, you know, the ISO in search of and offers. And so it's also new to us. We're really just learning how to handle that privacy concern, and of course the safety. But on Facebook, you're absolutely right. We are putting ourselves out there, and we do become targets for ABC reasons, and you know, people don't like what you have to say, you know, whatever it is. So it is definitely a trickier um, thing to be so engaged and so personal, when in fact you could be dealing with anybody who may not agree with you to the point where they, you know, they may wish you harm. And so I think a lot of what we do is we're on a tightrope, to be honest with you. With CareMongering, it is a tightrope. We struggle with that, and so we're actively trying to figure out ways to move it away from this platform so that it becomes more of you know, a self-run process that doesn't expose folks in a way that, you know, may be unsafe. So we're actively working on that process right now.
Yeah, it's fascinating because just thinking of some of the things that Jane Jacobs wrote about in The Life and Death of Great American Cities, she talks about the meaningful interactions of strangers, like just walking
Mm-hmm.
down the street and having those things where you don't know the person, but you know, just it's like a little spark throughout your day. And
Yeah.
in the world that we live in, we don't have that. Like you don't make, you know, flirtatious eye contact with someone, or like
Yeah.
someone doesn't just compliment your nails, or you know, hold the door or whatever it is.
I
And
do.
I mean, I told my roommate that she looked really nice, so but I tell her that most days. uh that said, I feel like the online experience, you know, there's so much wrapped up into what people are putting out into online communities.
Yeah.
And if you're anonymous and when you're not, or if you're using someone to speak on your behalf because of whatever reason, it just made me wonder like what kind of interactions people are having in the culture it creates and things like that, and what people are maybe missing from the world outside,
Mm-hmm.
and how that is kind of pushing people to engage on the internet, or like the chat function in Zoom is like a whole thing now. um,
Yeah.
is that a thing we should give people or take it away, and what kind of facilitation are we looking at? That said, it is 6:15,
Yeah,
and
we went way over.
so I wanted to end on a positive note. And I'm gonna have one question, and then I'll wrap it up. But my question is, in this new world that we're currently in, um, I think that it could be said that there are some positive things that have happened, unexpected things, or things that we are still figuring out. And I would love to know, what are things that you have seen or see are blossoming that you would want to bring with you beyond this? Like, what are things that you would like to see continue to live on, whether it's the culture of kindness and generosity and gentleness, or better technology, or recognizing internet as a right, whatever it is. um, I'm curious to know, as online organizers and just also as your own people just trying to figure out the world, what are things that you'd like to carry with you in the future?
The biggest thing that I've seen is the coming together of groups of people that never otherwise would have engaged. That's a beautiful thing. It can be a really unsafe thing for marginalized communities, but for the most part, it has been a really beautiful thing. So I think that what we've gained from this is the ability to make people aware of what's really happening out there, because they were forced to become aware, and we now have this platform to allow them to be educated about these issues. And there are a lot of great people out there who want to learn, who want to be compassionate, who want to be loving, who want to be non-judgmental towards marginalized communities, who have come to the table and said, yeah, I want to learn. I understand that I'm not in the same situation, and I want to be a part of that solution. So I think if we can carry that forward, so much can change. So much can change. Yeah.
That's great. David, what
Yeah,
about you?
what I would want, sorry, I was just going to say that this, more people coming together and having discussions really enables more information to surface. And I think that's what's very crucial, is that we have the information available from around our city, around our communities, to really know what exactly is happening and what has to be done on all levels, both helping people that can barely get off the ground, and, for instance, to make places more human and comfortable for everyone, right? So being aware of what's happening is the first step to have a discussion and then make decisions that
Yes.
helps everyone.
Hands down.
Yeah, totally. I've seen a lot of people demonstrate a lot of gentleness and giving a lot of space for people to, like, recognizing that people are, living 1 hour at a time at this rate, and that, as Valentina, you've said so many time and time again, that people are living at different intersections with different resources and different communities and different traumas and histories and all of the things that make a person who they are.
Yeah.
And in what I see in online communities is, um, thanks to work, to people who are organizing, like in mutual aid communities, especially communities of color, often led by women of color,
Mm-hmm.
indigenous people, Black people, um, communities that, as you said, Valentina, at the start, that have historically had to rely on mutual aid.
In order to survive, yeah.
A huge history and a very long one. I see that becoming more and more, I would like to think, a default setting for conversations and community building. And I'm really excited about that. I really value that. And I feel like it's the type of thing that, you can carry it inside you. It takes up no space other than like clearing out some space within yourself. And it's a thing that is so easy to bring into other spaces in the future. And I'd like to think that we're gonna come out a little bit kinder and gentler if we work together on that. That said,
Agreed.
yeah, this was such a wonderful conversation, and I am so glad I had the opportunity to join both of you and all of our
Thank
participants from
you.
all over the world. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insight and your experiences. Before we go, I would like to say that the next event happening for the James Walk Festival is a screening called The Reconciliation of Bay Street by Andre Casabon. And there is a link on the James Walk website. It has the password, so you can get the password to log into Vimeo. And that's happening later tonight. And also check out all of the other walks and talks that are happening this weekend. I have a bunch of friends that
Oh,
are
yeah.
tomorrow, so I'm excited to see them. But that said, it's been such a pleasure. I've seen both of your groups from afar, so it's nice to be able to take this time with you. So thank you for all of your words and for your time today, and thanks to everyone around the world for being a part of this.
Thanks, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to show up and to listen. Takes a lot to listen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Bye, everyone. Take care. Stay safe.
Oh, wow. Lots of good comments in the chat over here. Chris says, I feel I've seen the future of James Walk. That's so exciting.
Yeah, just as everyone's leaving, just if you want to check out Plan Together, it's plantogether.city. And from there, you should be able to, place something on the map or request your area if it's not enabled already.
It'll be exciting to see all of the projects that come out of this slice of history. I imagine we'll see a lot of really cool pieces of technology that have come out in response to this. We're just waiting to happen. Oh, what happened in my chat? All right, we're gonna go. Igor's gonna call it a day. So thank you everyone for coming.
See you later.
Thanks so much for having us. See you later.
Thank you. Thanks, Rachel. Bye. Thanks, Igor.